Well, hello, we are team number 8. We are going to talk about the education system in Mexico and how can we um, make it better. So let's start by saying that the education system in Mexico is far from perfect. It has high dropout rates and has a shortage of buildings, teachers, and textbooks. Schools in urban areas tend to be better, but they are far from the expected. There are a lot of things to consider and to make better. Private schools also tend to be better overall, but some of the prices that they manage are just like almost nobody or just a little sector of the population can afford it. Mexico's education system is often segregated by social class, and notable differences are seen between most developed states and most underdeveloped states. The organization that is in charge of managing all this is the SEP, the Secretary of Public Education, and is in charge of the administration and the overall education system. Public schools are secular. This means that they can have religious tendencies. And within these schools, you can identify three main levels. That is primary school, that is grades from 1 to 6, ages 6 to 12. Junior high school, that is grades 7 to 9, ages 12 to 15. And high school, that is grades 10 to 12, ages between 15 and 18. For students, it is required that they have at least 60% of in the global international examinations at the end of each school year. But high schoolers have many options. For example, there are technological and technical and vocational high schools, which its main objective is to prepare the students for the workspace so that they can start easing into it. On the other hand, students that attend the general high school obtain general studies in subjects that they may later specialize in. Sadly, corruption reports of Mexican public schools is something that is very usual. Normally, these schools are underfunded, lacking resources, and have very high dropout rates, as we discussed earlier. Thank you.
Now let's use Finland as an example because it is one of the only countries in the world to offer free education from pre-primary to college. And according to the OECD, it has one of the best education systems on the world. Let's talk about their administrative system to understand how it works. So it's possible to see where the results come from. The governance in Finland is based on the principle of decentralization. That is why the authorities of local cities have a huge amount of autonomy and responsibility. But there is an organism, the Ministry of Education and Culture, that defines the education policy, and there's another organism that is in charge of the implementation of these policies, that is the Finnish National Agency for Education. The Ministry of Education and Culture is responsible of all the publicly funded education, and it's responsible for preparing the educational legislation, and it's chair of the state budget for the government. The Finnish National Agency of Education is a national development agency which works hand by hand with the Ministry of Education to develop educational objectives, contents, methods for the early childhood, pre-primary, basic, upper secondary, and adult education. But it is not responsible of higher education. They also drop the national core of the curricula and the requirements. They also monitor and develop the educational expenditure, and they allocate state subsidies and assist the Ministry of Education and Culture in the preparation of the education policy decisions. Earlier, it was mentioned that the municipalities, aka the local government, has a huge role in the education system. They are responsible of financing and organizing the early childhood education and care, also the pre-primary and basic education at a local level. It's their task to offer all children of compulsory school age an opportunity to learn according their abilities. The local authorities make decisions on allocation of funding and recruitment of personnel. Sometimes the decision making power is delegated to schools. Usually the schools themselves draw their own local curricula within the framework of the national core curriculum, and they are also in charge of the practical teaching arrangements, the effectiveness, and the quality of their education. This all means that the schools have a right to provide educational services according to their own administrative arrangements and visions, as long as they are following the laws. And well, that's all. Thank you.
Well, to simplify in a simple word, the public education, we can say it is a public education in Mexico is insufficient, unequal, and overall, it is difficult to measure the quality. This is due to a constant process of conformism in the educational area, leaving the great quality process to the private system, which has been the biggest mistake in the educational system in Mexico. Currently, these problems increase more with social and regional gaps, apart from the fact that access and exercise of the right to education is less for the vulnerable groups and specifically in rural regions. Public education can be summed up in these simple words: an uncertain quality, because it is true that there are great teachers in the educational system who do everything possible to be updated and to get the best of themselves in the classroom. But on the other side, we have teachers with conformism in the way to teach, and not only because due to the age, but also because of conformism culture. Currently, the level of basic education at the public level and the private level have been immense difference, which should be one of the greatest concerns in the currently educational system. Um, it is necessary to close that gap between public education and private education, because the true way to move the country forward is with quality public education, and the public education is not the cheap version of the education, but it's the main competition. But the problem is not only a low level of quality, but a non-existent education, in the country not only has insufficient educational offering, it is also insufficient in the teaching staff. How is it possible that families make the effort to put their children in their educational system and there are no teachers who can give the class? Or there are an overload of students in a single class. How is it possible that a class for 40 people, there are 100 students? There are not enough teachers in the educational system that allow us to at least have an education And we are not longer talking about quality education, simply that there is a teacher than a normal class. What our team considers that there is learning every day, that is what we call a basic education. The programs in different areas are outdated in the aspect that the human is constantly evolving and constantly discovering new things. But even so, there are conformism behaviors that do not allow the progress in the educations, since progress it is not a normal word in the culture of education in Mexico. Currently, in Mexican public education, there is not specialized education. There is only a general plan to present education as if all humans were the same, as if all students were in the same situation. It is true that it was a great advance, that there are adaptations for the different types of students, but even so, there is non-specialized educations. If someone excels in a subject, they will never know because they only teach what they should teach, and they only do what they should do. And this behavior is unacceptable. The students cannot identify what they are good at, and they can exploit in the educational system. And this is due to the fact that the educational system is outdated. Therefore, there is non-specialized education, something that is constantly being promoted and updated in the private schools. As I had previously said, it is vital that the educational gap between the public system and the private system is closed, and in the future greater competition is achieved in the public educational system. Lastly, it's unacceptable as there is no basic infrastructure in many public schools. It is not uncommon for there to be a lack of chairs or desks so that students can feel comfortable in the class. That area where the future of Mexico is developing, there is no chairs and no desk, so that the student cannot feel a minimally comfortable classroom. But there are still worse things, like there are no doors in the public schools, there are no windows in the public schools. Therefore, when it is very cold or it is very hot, the infrastructure of public schools do not allow students to find themselves comfortable. How is it possible for a student to advance his intellectual capacity if it is very cold or it is very hot? How will a student develop correctly if the basic infrastructure is not met, if the walls are torn, the windows are broken, the doors are not working, the sport areas are a disaster, and the areas where they should rest are unacceptable? To say some things that are sad for our country is that in the upper secondary level, there is only one school unit for every 1,000 young people, which allows the world over demand in the educational system. Other thing that is sad is at the national level, the coverage of education for adults only reaches the 5.4% of the potential population. About 2 million students enrolled in the public schools are lost. The dropout at the secondary level is disturbing because many of these young people leave due to the low educational level in the currently public system. Another disturbing fact is that the net enrollment rates goes from 98.4% in primary school to a 62% in the high school. So there is a big quantity of people leaving the classes because the public educational system is not working and is unacceptable. 2 of every 10 basic education students do not have a basic furniture, do not have, in the high school, the 7 out of 10, and mentioned before, it is not possible to young men to bring out the maximum intellect level if there is not a good environment to develop it. As we can see, the problem not only encompasses the institutions, but it is aggravated by the social and regional gap, since 1.4 million young people expend excessive time to transfer to their instruction institutions. In the curriculum for basic education, people with disabilities or speakers of indigenous language are not visualized. It is true that currently the government has focus on these areas, but even so, its focus becomes insufficient. In rural communities, 6 out of 10 people, young people between 15 and 17 years old are living isolated from the educational system. And we can see that 13.2% of children and young people in extreme poverty do not attend to mandatory education. So we need to change that by increasing the level of quality in the administration of public education. There should be new things to change all these dates, to change all these parameters, and to finally say that the public education is better than the private education. We need to focus in the quality of the teachers, in the quality of the infrastructure, but we need to focus in the specialized educations, because a general education for everyone is not a form of quality in education. Okay, so we are going to finish with the conclusion.
As a conclusion, we can see that in many stages and kinds of administration are heavily inspired by who and how many people they are aimed for, in this case being one of the central concepts of society, the education system. That in case of not being successful enough, you can decrease the chances of a certain generation to come on top of their situations and falling behind generations that had a better handling of their knowledge. The way that an education system is implemented is ever-changing. New people come and go to the offices and heavily affect what the next generation of kids will be learning. These things like a company system has been implemented, having a moderate success in various degrees, always raising the bar to prove of what the students are capable of, comforting them about what will be their situation on an everyday job. The big factor in this is the quantity in the population. Everyone needs a chance to accomplish what they aim for. But with millions of people wanting the same, how do you prepare them for that? When do you need to start preparing them? That's a question that many educational systems have asked through the years, and many different kinds of administrative strategies to answer that question have been implemented, but nothing has given a concrete answer to that satisfies our necessities. That's the end of our presentation. Thank you, and that's it.